My name was Master Sergeant Robert Bobby Hayes, and I died at the age of 45 with a bullet in my chest, deep in a forest in Texas. Officially, it was a hunting accident, but the truth is I was coldly executed by the woman I swore to love and protect, along with her greedy brothers, who saw me as nothing more than an easy paycheck. They thought they had orchestrated the perfect crime against a mentally unstable veteran. What they didn't know is that in 20 years of military service, I learned that every good soldier always has a contingency plan. The irony of my death is that I spent 2 decades risking my life on battlefields in Afghanistan and Iraq, facing bombs, snipers, and suicide attacks, only to be betrayed and murdered by the very family I was supposed to protect. I was born in a small town in Kansas, the son of a farmer and a grade school teacher. I was raised with traditional American values, hard work, honesty, and love for my country. At 18, just after graduating high school, I enlisted in the United States Army. It was 2001, and the world had just changed forever after the 9/11 attacks. Over the next 2 decades, I served my country with pride and distinction. I did 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq, climbing the military ranks until I reached the position of Master Sergeant. I commanded dozens of soldiers, took part in high-risk missions, and saved lives than I can count. But war also came at a price. In 2017, during my last mission in Kandahar, an IED, improvised explosive device, explosion nearly killed me. I woke up 3 days later in a military hospital in Germany with metal shrapnel lodged in my right leg, a severe concussion, and what the doctors called psychological trauma consistent with combat PTSD. That was the end of my active duty career. I returned to the United States in 2018 at the age of 41, with a military pension of $4,500 a month, a life insurance policy worth $750,000, and a combat injury compensation totaling $1.2 million. But more important than the money, I had 2 decades of military operations, tactical intelligence, and, as my wife and her brothers would find out too late, identifying threats and neutralizing enemies. It was during my rehab at the San Antonio Military Medical Center that I met Linda Hayes, a 38-year-old nurse working in the Wounded Veterans Ward. Linda was beautiful, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in my recovery. While other medical staff treated me like just another PTSD case, she spent extra time talking to me, listening to my war stories, and helping me process my trauma. "Bobby, you're a hero," she used to say while changing the bandages on my leg. "Men like you gave everything for our country. You deserve to be cared for and loved for the rest of your life." Her words touched my wounded heart. After decades of sleeping in trenches and military tents, the idea of having a real home, a family, a peaceful life, it was irresistible. Linda seemed like the answer to my prayers, a woman who understood my pain and wanted to build something beautiful on top of my war scars. We dated for a year and got married in a simple ceremony in Austin, Texas in September 2019. Linda wore a plain white dress, and I wore my full military uniform with all the combat decorations I had earned. Her brothers, 35-year-old Mark and 32-year-old Steve, served as groomsmen. During his wedding speech, Mark said, "Bobby, you're not just getting a wife today. You're gaining a family that will support you for the rest of your life." Those words would prove to be chillingly prophetic. With the compensation money, we bought a beautiful ranch-style house in Fredericksburg, Texas, a peaceful town in the heart of the Texas Hill Country. The property had 15 acres, stunning views of the hills, and enough space for me to hunt and fish, activities that helped me cope with my PTSD. The first 2 years of marriage were genuinely happy. Linda was loving and patient with my night terrors and anxiety episodes. When I woke up screaming in the middle of the night, reliving ambushes in Afghanistan, she would hold me and whisper soothing words until I fell back asleep. Mark and Steve also seemed to accept me as part of the family. Mark worked as a mechanic at a local shop and always asked for my advice on cars and equipment. Steve was an insurance salesman who often praised me for making all the right moves with my retirement and military benefits. "Man, you've got it made for life," Steve used to say at weekend barbecues. "Lifetime pension, fat life insurance, house fully paid off. Bobby, you hit the jackpot." At the time, I took those comments as genuine admiration. Only later would I realize they were calculating exactly how much I was worth dead. Linda often bragged to her friends about marrying a decorated war hero. She loved wearing my military jacket when we went out and always introduced me as my husband, Master Sergeant Hayes, veteran of 3 wars. I felt proud that she appreciated my military service. But in hindsight, I realize Linda never showed real interest in my combat experiences or the emotional struggles I carried. When I tried to talk about the friends I lost in war or the survivor's guilt that haunted me, she quickly changed the subject. Her admiration was shallow. She loved the romantic idea of being married to a war hero, but didn't want to deal with the painful, complex realities that came with it. During the first year, I shared stories with Linda and her family about my brothers in arms who died in combat, about innocent civilians we couldn't save, about the impossible decisions military commanders have to make in war zones. They listened politely, but I could tell they found those conversations too heavy for family gatherings. Little by little, I learned to keep that part of myself hidden. At family events, I was just Bobby, Linda's successful husband, not the traumatized soldier who sometimes woke up thinking he was still in a base surrounded by Taliban fighters. The change began subtly in early 2022. Linda started showing increasing irritation toward my PTSD episodes. When I'd wake up screaming from nightmares, instead of comforting me, she'd let out a loud sigh and complain that I was disturbing her sleep. "Bobby, it's been 3 years since you got back from the war," she said one morning after a particularly rough night. "Don't you think it's time to get over it? My friends keep asking if you're getting better, and I don't even know what to tell them." Her words cut deep. PTSD isn't something you just get over, like a cold. It's an invisible wound that some veterans carry for the rest of their lives. But I tried to be understanding. Maybe Linda just didn't grasp the complexity of combat trauma. Mark and Steve also started acting differently around me. During a family barbecue in April 2022, Steve made a joke about my crazy vet syndrome after I got startled by the sound of fireworks from a neighbor's celebration. "Relax, Bobby," he laughed as he cracked open another beer. "It's just fireworks, not Taliban mortars. You're home, man." Mark chimed in with the joke, "Maybe you need more therapy, bro. Grown men shouldn't freak out over party noises." Linda laughed along, and that hurt more than their jokes. My own wife was laughing at my condition as a traumatized veteran. I started to question whether I really was overreacting the way they suggested. In June 2022, I accidentally discovered Linda had been doing some strange searches on our home computer. While checking my military retirement emails on the laptop, I saw several search entries in the browser history. How to declare veteran mentally incompetent, how to take control of military pensions, and legal process to gain guardianship over spouse. At first, I tried to rationalize those searches. Maybe Linda was just worried about my well-being and looking into ways to help me. But something in my military instincts, the same instincts that had kept me alive in 2 decades of war zones, told me something was off. I started paying closer attention to the conversations and behavior of my family. During a visit in July, I overheard Mark whispering on the phone out on the porch. "No, Mom, he's getting worse. Linda says he's having violent outbursts. It's just a matter of time before he does something really dangerous." Violent outbursts? I had never even raised my voice to Linda, let alone shown any kind of aggression. But apparently that was the narrative they were building about me. The real revelation came in August 2022. Linda thought I was asleep, but I was just resting on the couch when she got a call from Mark. She spoke quietly, but my military training had taught me to sharpen my hearing for potential threats. "Mark, I need you and Steve to help me," she whispered. "Bobby is becoming more and more unstable. Yesterday, he mistook the postman for an Afghan insurgent and nearly attacked the poor guy." That was a blatant lie. I had greeted the mailman politely, just like I always did, but Linda kept going. "The doctors say that veterans with severe PTSD can become dangerous to themselves and others. A traumatized man with access to firearms is a ticking bomb. We need to act before he hurts someone, or himself." The conversation went on for 20 minutes, and every word felt like a dagger. Linda described episodes of erratic behavior that never happened, mentioned veiled threats I never made, and painted a picture of a dangerous veteran who needed to be neutralized before a tragedy occurred. "If we can prove he's mentally incompetent," she explained to Mark, "I can gain full control over his retirement and benefits. That's nearly $5,000 a month for life. And if something happens to him, well, that life insurance policy is $750,000. Mark said something I couldn't quite hear, but Linda's response chilled me to the bone. "It doesn't have to be anything dramatic. Veterans with severe PTSD have a really high suicide rate. Or accidents. Traumatized men can be really careless with firearms." That's when I knew my life was in danger. The woman I had married, sworn to love and protect, was planning either my death or forced institutionalization to steal my military benefits.
Like any good soldier facing a threat, I began a reconnaissance plan. Over the following months, I secretly documented everything Linda, Mark, and Steve said and did. I discreetly installed a voice recording app on my phone and started logging our conversations. In September, I found out that Linda had consulted with 3 different attorneys about guardianship procedures. She had a hidden folder in the bedroom with documents about mental incapacity in veterans and forms to request legal conservatorship over mentally incompetent individuals. In one recorded conversation, I heard Mark suggest, "Linda, you need to provoke an episode in front of witnesses. Invite some neighbors over for dinner, then bring up the war or something that sets him off. If he has a meltdown in front of others, it'll be way easier to convince a judge that he's dangerous." Steve added, "And you've got to document everything. Record it on your phone if he flips out. A veteran yelling and acting aggressive, any judge would see that as proof of mental instability." They were systematically plotting to trigger my war trauma and use it against me in court. It was calculated cruelty that made me sick to my stomach. In October, Linda began implementing their plan. She invited neighbors over for dinners and deliberately brought up topics of war and death during conversation. "Bobby, why don't you tell the Johnsons about that time you almost died in Afghanistan?" she'd say, innocently, knowing that recalling specific combat events could trigger my PTSD symptoms. When I tried to change the subject or leave the room, she'd insist, "Don't be shy, honey, you're a hero. People need to hear about the sacrifices our veterans make." One night, she even went as far as playing a YouTube video on the living room TV, filled with sounds of explosions and gunfire, knowing full well that combat noises caused me flashbacks. When I got startled and asked her to turn it off, Linda acted surprised. "Bobby, it's just a war movie. If you can't even watch a movie, maybe you need more serious medical help." By November, I started feeling strangely lethargic and foggy. The medication I had relied on to manage my PTSD seemed to be having odd side effects. I was sleeping too much, couldn't focus, and felt like I was constantly in a mental haze.
One day, by accident, I dropped my pill bottle in the bathroom and the pills scattered across the floor. I noticed some of them looked slightly different in color. I took one of the different pills to a pharmacy, pretending I wanted to confirm the medication. The pharmacist confirmed my suspicions. "Mr. Hayes, this is not your prescribed medication. It appears to be a stronger sedative, possibly high-dose lorazepam. If you've been taking this on top of your regular meds, that would explain the drowsiness and confusion you mentioned." Linda had been drugging me on purpose, trying to make me more unstable and build evidence that I couldn't take care of myself. It was a diabolical strategy, using my PTSD against me by tampering with my meds to amplify the symptoms and justify declaring me unfit. In December 2024, Mark suggested we go on a relaxing hunting trip in early January. "Bobby, you've seemed really stressed lately. How about a weekend of deer hunting at my buddy's property? Fresh air, nature, no pressure. Could be just what you need to clear your head." Steve chimed in, "It's a great idea. You always said hunting helps you relax, and out in the woods, you can really disconnect from everything." Linda was fully on board. "Sweetheart, you should go. You've been so down lately. A guy's trip could be therapeutic." At the time, a part of me still wanted to believe my family genuinely cared about me. Despite all the evidence I had gathered, a small voice in my head whispered that maybe I was being paranoid, a common symptom of PTSD. But my military instinct was screaming red alerts. An isolated trip into the woods, just me and two men I'd overheard discussing how to get rid of me? It was obviously a trap. Still, I agreed to go. Not because I trusted them, but because the time had finally come to execute my own plan.
For 2 weeks in December, I finalized my contingency plan. Like any successful military operation, the key was meticulous preparation and identifying trustworthy allies. My best friend and most trusted ally was Tom Rodriguez, my former sergeant and comrade from 2 wars. Tom had retired from the Army a year before I did and lived in Houston. He was one of the few people who truly understood my condition as a veteran, and I knew he would never betray me. I organized all the evidence I had gathered about Linda's plan: audio recordings of their conspiratorial conversations, photographs of the legal documents she had prepared, lab results of the tampered medication, and a detailed timeline of all the suspicious behaviors. I also created a comprehensive document explaining my situation and my suspicions about what Linda, Mark, and Steve were planning. I included information about my military benefits, insurance policies, and specific instructions on what to do in case something happened to me. On December 15th, I drove to Houston and met Tom in his favorite bar, a place frequented by veterans where we could talk undisturbed. "Tom, I need you to hold on to this for me," I said, handing him a sealed envelope containing all the evidence. "If anything happens to me, anything suspicious, I want you to take this straight to CID. CID, the Criminal Investigation Division, is the U.S. Army's unit responsible for investigating crimes against active duty soldiers and veterans. They had the jurisdiction and the resources to properly investigate any crime against me." Tom gave me a serious look. "Bobby, what the hell is going on? You look like a man preparing for a dangerous mission." I told him everything: Linda's change in behavior, the audio recordings of their conspiratorial conversations, the evidence I'd gathered. Tom listened silently, his expression growing darker with every word. "Son of a bitch," he muttered when I finished. "That bitch is planning to kill you for the benefits." "That's exactly it," I confirmed. "And if my suspicions are right, they're going to try to make it look like an accident during this hunting trip." Tom gripped the envelope tightly. "Bobby, don't go on that trip. Report this now before it's too late." "Tom, I don't have enough for a criminal complaint yet. All I have are vague conversations and suspicious behavior. But if they actually try to kill me, well, then we'll have a real crime to investigate." "You're using yourself as bait, brother. This is a suicide mission." "No," I replied calmly. "It's justice. If they're innocent, nothing will happen, and I'll look paranoid. But if they really try to kill me, you'll have everything you need to destroy them." I gave Tom specific instructions. If I die under suspicious circumstances during this trip, hunting accident, drowning, anything that seems too convenient,
Take this envelope straight to Special Agent Sarah Mitchell at CID in Fort Sam, Houston. She's sharp and won't let anything slide." Tom agreed reluctantly, and we said goodbye with a long embrace. We both knew it could be the last time we'd see each other alive.
On the morning of January 3rd, 2025, Mark and Steve arrived at my house before dawn. They were unusually cheerful for a simple hunting trip, talking loudly and laughing, a classic sign of nervousness I'd learned to spot in soldiers before dangerous missions. "We're gonna have an amazing day, Bobby," Mark declared as he loaded my gear into the car. "The weather's perfect, the property's full of deer, and we finally get some quality brother time." Steve added, "Exactly what you need, man. Away from the stress of the city, just the three of us and nature." Linda kissed me goodbye at the door, and for a moment her eyes showed something that might have been remorse. But then she whispered, "Have fun, honey. I hope you find the peace you've been looking for." Prophetic words. During the 2-hour drive to the rural property, Mark and Steve kept up a forcedly casual conversation about work, sports, and New Year's plans. But I noticed them exchanging meaningful glances in the rearview mirror, and Steve was checking his phone compulsively. The hunting property was in an extremely remote area, surrounded by thousands of acres of dense forest. The access road was a dirt trail that wound nearly 5 miles through thick brush before reaching the main cabin. "Perfect for a peaceful hunt," Mark commented as he parked. "Out here, no one's gonna bother us. We can spend the whole day in the woods without seeing a single soul." Again, his words carried a double meaning that didn't go unnoticed. We spent the morning setting up camp and checking our gear. I loaded my Remington 870, the same weapon I had used during recon missions in Afghanistan. Mark had a Winchester 30-06, and Steve carried a Mossberg 500. During lunch at the cabin, the tension in the air was palpable. They tried to keep the conversation light, but I could tell they were just waiting for the right moment to act. Around 3 p.m., Mark suggested we explore a more distant part of the property, where he claimed to have seen tracks of a big buck the week before. "It's about a mile hike into the woods," he explained, "but it's worth it. If we get that deer, it'll be the hunt of a lifetime." We followed a narrow trail through the dense forest. I walked in front, with Mark and Steve behind me. The entire hike, my military instincts were on full alert, the same gut feeling I used to get during patrols in Afghanistan when I knew insurgents were nearby. We reached a small clearing, surrounded by tall trees. Mark said, "Bobby, you see that deer trail over there? Looks fresh." As I turned to look in the direction he pointed, I heard the unmistakable sound of a shotgun being racked behind me. "I'm sorry, Bobby, but you've become too much of a problem for our family." I turned slowly, keeping my hands visible. Mark was aiming his Winchester straight at my chest, while Steve held his shotgun in a backup position. "A problem?" I asked calmly. "What kind of problem?" "You know damn well," Steve replied. "Linda told us about your violent outbursts, your threats, your erratic behavior. It's only a matter of time before you hurt someone." "Or do something terrible to yourself," Mark added. "Traumatized veterans. Well, everybody knows how those stories end." I laughed, genuinely amused by their performance. "So this is how you're going to justify my murder? An unstable veteran who killed himself during a breakdown." "It won't be suicide," Mark corrected. "It'll be a tragic accident. A shotgun went off while you were climbing over a fence. Happens all the time during hunting season." "And Linda will be devastated. The poor widow of a war hero battling his inner demons. She'll get all the sympathy and all the benefits." At that moment, with a shotgun pointed at my chest, I did something that completely took them by surprise. I smiled. "You really think I'm an idiot?" I asked calmly.
You think I survived 20 years of war just to be outsmarted by 3 greedy amateurs? Mark frowned. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that I've known about this plan for months. I know about Linda's research into veteran conservatorship. I know about the meetings with lawyers. I know about the tampered medication. And most importantly, I know you're here to murder me. Steve looked visibly nervous. You're delusional, Bobby. Nobody wants to hurt you. Oh, yeah? I slowly pulled my phone from my pocket. Then explain this. I played a recording I had made the previous week where Linda and Mark were discussing the Bobby problem and how a hunting accident would be perfect because it looks natural. Their voices came out clearly through the phone's speaker, discussing specific details about how to stage my death and split the benefits. Mark's face went pale. How would you get that? Because I'm a veteran trained in intelligence operations, you idiots. You spent months planning how to kill me, but never considered I might be investigating you. Realizing their plan had been exposed, Mark panicked. It doesn't matter what you recorded. You're going to die today, and no one's ever going to hear those recordings. He pulled the trigger. The bullet hit me in the chest, tearing through my right lung. I collapsed onto the grass, feeling the warm blood soak through my shirt. The pain was intense, but I had been wounded in combat before. I knew what a fatal wound felt like. Shit, Mark, Steve yelled. You actually shot him. It was him or us, Mark replied, still shaking. He knew everything. If he made it home alive, we were screwed. They moved closer to my body. I forced myself to lie completely still, controlling my breathing to appear dead. It was a technique I had learned in military survival training for enemy territory. Is he dead? Steve asked nervously. I think so, Mark said, but let's make sure. He raised a shotgun to aim at my head, but Steve stopped him. No, if you shoot him in the face, it'll be obvious it was an execution. It has to look like an accident. They spent the next 15 minutes staging the crime scene. They repositioned my body near an old fence, placed my shotgun beside me in a way that suggested an accidental discharge, and even dirtied their clothes to make it look like they had run to help. Stick to the story, Mark instructed Steve as they pulled out their phones to call emergency services. Bobby was crossing the fence when the shotgun caught on a loose board. We heard the shot and rushed over, but it was too late. Steve rehearsed his line. Yes, officer. It was a terrible accident. He was always very careful with firearms, but these things happen. Veterans sometimes, well, maybe he just wasn't paying attention like he normally would be. While they called 911 and rehearsed their lies, I used my last moments of consciousness to send a text message to Tom Rodriguez with my GPS location and a single word: execute. It was the code we had agreed on. Tom would immediately know I had been murdered, and it was time to hand over the evidence to CID. Minutes later, I heard sirens approaching. Paramedics arrived quickly, followed by local police. Mark and Steve gave their version of the events. It happened so fast, Mark sobbed to the officers. 1 second he was crossing the fence, the next, the shot. We ran to help, but there was nothing we could do. Steve added, Bobby had been going through some tough times lately. PTSD, you know? Maybe he wasn't as careful as he usually is. The local police, seeing 2 seemingly distraught men and a veteran dead under circumstances that looked clearly accidental, accepted the story without much questioning. After all, hunting accidents are common in rural areas, especially with veterans who might have slower reflexes due to combat trauma. But they didn't know that Tom Rodriguez had already received my message and was on his way to CID headquarters in Houston with enough evidence to completely dismantle their version of events. I died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, but my revenge had only just begun. Tom arrived at the CID office 2 hours after my death, personally delivering the sealed envelope to Special Agent Sarah Mitchell. Agent Mitchell, Tom said with a voice both steady and furious, my war brother, Master Sergeant Bobby Hayes, was murdered today by his wife and her brothers to steal his military benefits. This envelope contains all the evidence you need to put those parasites behind bars. Agent Mitchell opened the envelope and found months of meticulous investigation. Audio recordings of Linda, Mark, and Steve conspiring to kill me, photographs of legal documents prepared for conservatorship, lab analyses proving medication tampering, and a detailed timeline of all suspicious behavior. Most importantly, she found my final letter explaining exactly what I expected to happen. If you're reading this, it means Linda Hayes, Mark Hayes, and Steve Hayes have executed their plan to murder me. They killed a decorated American veteran for money. This is a federal crime against a military member, and I demand they be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. All the evidence for conviction is included in this file. Don't let them get away with it. Within 24 hours of my death, CID had launched a full criminal investigation. As a veteran, I was under federal protection, and my murder fell under multiple federal jurisdictions, from the murder of a service member to fraud involving military benefits. Agent Mitchell quickly discovered that my accidental death had ballistic inconsistencies that couldn't be ignored. The bullet's trajectory, gunpowder residue on my clothing, and entry angle did not match an accidental discharge while crossing a fence. More importantly, forensic analysis of my phone revealed the text messages and recordings I had collected, including conversations where Linda, Mark, and Steve explicitly discussed how to kill me and split my benefits. 3 days after my military funeral, where Linda masterfully played the role of the inconsolable widow, federal agents knocked on the door of our home in Fredericksburg with arrest warrants. Linda was making breakfast when she heard the knock. When she opened the door and saw the federal badges, all the color drained from her face. "Linda Hayes," Agent Mitchell announced formally, "you are under arrest for the premeditated murder of Master Sergeant Robert Hayes, conspiracy to commit benefit fraud, and tampering with prescribed medication." This is a mistake," Linda stammered. "Bobby died in a hunting accident. I wasn't even there." "We know exactly where you were, and we know exactly what you planned," Agent Mitchell replied coldly. Mark and Steve were arrested simultaneously at their homes, both in complete shock. They truly believed they had committed the perfect crime. The trial became a national sensation. The media covered the story extensively, the war veteran who uncovered his own family's plan to murder him and gathered enough evidence to take them down, even after death. The recordings I had made were played in court, revealing in sordid detail how Linda, Mark, and Steve plotted to use my PTSD against me, how they planned to tamper with my medication to make me appear more unstable, and how they decided a hunting accident would be the perfect way to eliminate me. The federal prosecutor described the case as one of the most calculated and cruel betrayals of an American veteran we've ever seen. He argued that they didn't just kill a man, they shattered the trust veterans should be able to place in their families. In December 2025, all three were convicted of first-degree murder of a military veteran, a federal crime that carries a sentence of life imprisonment. Linda was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, along with fines that amounted to the total value of my military benefits. During sentencing, the judge stated, "You didn't just betray your husband. You betrayed every American veteran who entrusted their lives to their families." Mark and Steve also received life sentences, with the judge noting that the murder was premeditated, cruel, and purely driven by greed. All of my military benefits, monthly pension, life insurance, and any future entitlements were redirected to the Veterans Foundation, an organization that supports war veterans with PTSD and their families. Tom Rodriguez was appointed special executor of my estate, ensuring that my money would be used to help other soldiers facing challenges like mine. The house in Fredericksburg was sold, and the funds were used to launch a support program for veterans who are victims of domestic abuse. Linda, who so desperately wanted me dead for the money, ended up with nothing. Not only did she lose all inheritance, but now faces the rest of her life behind bars, where other inmates aren't exactly kind to those who kill war veterans. Mark and Steve, who once called me crazy and suggested I needed more medical help, now spend 23 hours a day in solitary confinement, with all the time in the world to reflect on how badly they underestimated a veteran trained in military operations. My story became a case study in military academies and veteran support programs on how to recognize and protect yourself from family exploitation. The Hayes Protocol is now taught to returning veterans, educating them about warning signs of relatives who might try to exploit their benefits or mental health conditions. More importantly, my posthumous revenge sent a clear message. American veterans are not easy targets. We are trained soldiers who know how to detect threats, gather intelligence, and neutralize enemies, even when those enemies are the very family members who are supposed to support us. Linda, Mark, and Steve learned the hard way that messing with a war veteran carries severe consequences. They plotted my death for the military benefits I earned through blood, sweat, and sacrifice on foreign battlefields. In return, they received life sentences and the total destruction of their lives. Even in death, I was able to protect other veterans and ensure that my military service continued to benefit those who truly deserve support. It was the final mission of my career, and perhaps the most important one. Justice was served, and I finally found the peace I had been searching for, knowing that even in death, a good soldier always completes his mission. If you're a veteran listening to this story, remember, your family should be your safe haven after the horrors of war, not another source of danger. If something feels off, trust your military instincts, and always have a contingency plan. To everyone else, respect our veterans. They gave their lives, health, and youth for this country. They deserve love, support, and protection, not exploitation by greedy family members who see military benefits as lottery tickets. And to those thinking about taking advantage of vulnerable veterans, remember, we are soldiers trained for war. Underestimating our intelligence and strategic planning may be the last mistake you ever make. My war is over, but my mission to protect other veterans continues through this story. May it serve as both a warning and an inspiration to those who believe justice always prevails even beyond the grave.